So without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker. Actually, on your documents, you probably see two speakers, but I know since Robert Mankin is a colleague of mine, that he's here to speak about the topic exploration versus efficiency, the future of Korean tall buildings. His colleague, or our colleague, Jonathan Ward, was not able to attend, so Robert will make the presentation. But I think what you'll see, I haven't seen the presentation, but I think from the work that our firm has done, NBBJ has done in Korea, I'm sure there's some of that included, but also the approach of high-rise design and making high-rises more than just tall buildings and tall boxes, but actually multiple programs and multiple ideas about the evolution of the high-rise. So with that, I'll introduce Robert Mankin.
Thanks, Tim. Make sure I understand this device. And thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. This morning's talk is titled Exploration versus Efficiency, but it's really about thinking about where basically Korea is at in terms of its development as in architecture, in building, and also too in business, and thinking about this global push that Korea has had over the last 3 decades, and the entrepreneurship that we now see rising in the country, particularly in the technology sector, and how tall buildings can contribute to and basically empower this entrepreneurship and this global push. And a quick 10-second background, NBBJ has been practicing in Korea since the mid-1990s, and our practice began primarily in the healthcare sector, but over the last 10 years has been really focused around the commercial mixed use and corporate end user building type. And these are some examples of several buildings around Seoul, and also one in Busan in the upper right-hand corner that's in design. Buildings that have been recently completed over the last 5 years. And this experience that we've gained in doing these buildings has really, and the timeliness of this conference is really, it's an interesting point for me personally as well to talk and sort of step back and assess where Korea is at in terms of its development. And the next 2 slides are sort of a statistic and a quote. And basically, as of June 2010, the number of startup firms in Korea surpassed 20,000 for the first time. And that's a 10-fold increase since the late 1990s. Now, 20,000 in and of itself does not seem like an enormously significant number, but in this country, relative to its population and relative to its past history, it is tremendous progress. And the notion of having a startup firm and an entrepreneurial firm is actually something quite recent to Korea. And the government has taken note of this. Even President Lee has stated many times that the government needs to find ways to facilitate these young pioneers. And I should mention that most of these startups and these young firms are actually in the technology sector, in animation, in online gaming, other gaming, not in more of, say, the electronics and digitally focused industries, not necessarily in sort of more traditional manufacturing industries. And so NBBJ has had the good fortune to work with several of these clients, and particularly the electronics-focused clients. And so it provides a window into what some of the many opportunities are for Korea, but also what some of the challenges are. And so I wanted to outline a few, basically what I would call Korean contrasts. First of all, I've already mentioned the global aspiration of this country, of this market. You have companies like Samsung, LG, Daewoo, POSCO, working internationally all over the world. You saw some examples of their global work in some of the talks this morning. And so there's this global aspiration, yet at the same time, It is restrained a bit by a need for efficiency in building materials, efficiency in process. So there's this contrast that's at work. A big issue also is essentially the notion of a flat organization, which is a newer notion in Korean business versus a more hierarchical organization. The balance between innovation and fiscal conservatism. So particularly when it comes to the building and construction industry, innovative systems, innovative facades, innovative MEP systems, structure, what have you, but oftentimes those can be restrained by a need to maintain a more secure and stable route. And that brings up the last point, which is really how do you balance this growing sort of desire to take risk and be entrepreneurial and branch out into the globe? And how do you balance that with the traditional notion of stability and career path, and where most people actually are intended to go to work for a major company like Samsung? So in thinking about those points as sort of as sort of these cultural foundations, cultural and business foundations, and then how does the architecture and building community, and in particular, how do tall buildings in Korea, and you're going to see so many fine examples of tall buildings over the next several days, but how do tall buildings not only display their own innovation, but how do they promote innovation in the companies that inhabit them, in the people that live in them? How do they actually promote more of this, basically the statement that President Lee made, which is how do they support and partner with the government in really making Korea into an innovator, more so than just a manufacturer? MBBJ, from our practice, we've done some thinking about the performance of these buildings, and primarily how program is arranged within taller buildings. And one notion is in this diagram, which is called positive polarization. So essentially, it's this notion of taking seemingly contrasting and opposite programs that don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, reorganizing them in new and creative ways to promote new ways of circulating within a building, new ways of how people interact, different groups interacting with each other, and that this can exact change and promote new ideas. And then how can you then take that notion of this sort of redistributed, polarized building, and then make it a more synergistic tower, rather than having a situation where people are limited to floor plates or perhaps programs limited to particular sections within a building? Can we reorganize our buildings in a much more creative way and actually break the program up across many, many different areas, again, to promote the unexpected, the energetic, the ideas? So these two notions are notions that we've been pursuing in our practice, both in Korea and also around Asia. And so I want to share with you 3 case studies. 2 are from Korea, and I changed the last case study that's actually in the brief. I'm actually going to show a project in China, and then relate, because it actually has many corollaries to the issues of Korea. So starting with the case studies, this is and I should mention, the 3 case studies are all corporate end user facilities. And they're all for high-tech companies. So really, again, working with basically that market sector that is showing the most powerful inclination towards innovation and entrepreneurship. This building is called the NHN Green Factory in Bundong, which is actually just south of this area, just south of Seoul. It's actually on a major highway coming into the southeastern part of the city. And NHN is actually the parent company of Naver. It's the largest search portal and online gaming company in Korea. This building is 100,000 square foot end user headquarters for NHN that MBBJ it was just completed last year. MBBJ has been engaged with this project for a little over 5 years. And I show this and its relevance to the earlier points because this building really took a notion of not necessarily designing an iconic form or creating a new iconic brand for NHN as much as it was creating a building that was flexible and more basic to allow NHN's employees to express their own ideas in different ways in the building, so that if there's a new idea that happens, the building can be expressed both internally and externally on the building. So it's using a very sort of basic form, basic plan geometry to create this warehouse for ideas. And that's something that we don't encounter very often in corporate buildings in Korea. And then the other important piece of this building is that it's tectonics and its detailing. This is an example where essentially that high quality of tectonic is actually well balanced with being cost effective. And so you can see it in the detailing of this building. It's actually one of the best detailed buildings that we've been fortunate to do in Korea. And lastly, thinking about the building not just simply as an expression of the company, but also as a tool to recruit young entrepreneurs and attract new ideas. So I'm going to run through these next couple of slides fairly quickly. This is actually the site just off of the highway. Again, it's sort of in a fairly nondescript residential development, but a very high-profile site along the main highway as one comes into Seoul. And we started out, as many would, looking at several different options for the building. But in sort of working with NHN and really hearing their idea about wanting to create this warehouse for conversation, if you will, the ideas really tended towards being something more simple, straightforward, and really about a finely refined skin tectonic. And so we ultimately arrived on a very straightforward, I apologize, I keep hitting that button, a very straightforward office plan with a slightly offset core, but then with a system of louvers that actually surrounds the entire office plate. One of the challenges with NHN is that it's basically a building of programmers who like to spend most of their day in the dark. So how do you create this transparent, open building, yet allow these people the opportunity to do what they need to do in low light? And rather than having a standard shading, a system of mechanized louvers that run vertically around the perimeter of the building that give that flexibility, but also give them the opportunity to take branding on their facade and express it in different ways. So an internal sort of warehouse, but also an external changing of brand. And so these are some photographs. This is actually the view of the executed louvers from inside of the workspace. And then it creates an interesting and sort of ever-changing tapestry on the exterior of the building. And then the floor plan was desired to be as open and clear as possible so that they could not only house office on every level, but also have the ability to put an impromptu cafe or seating area on one of the floor plates. So while we weren't able to communicate and open up atria within the building vertically, within the interior, the different floors actually communicate with each other by synchronizing louver patterns on the facade. And so there's been a whole series of sort of interesting kind of ways that they've adapted this building already, even in just within the first year of it being in use. So this sort of notion of this warehouse, of these straightforward materials, is also expressed down into the lobby with one of the first, they claim it's the first, I'm not sure it really is the first, board form concrete finishes in Korea. But again, triple height lobby, sort of setting the tone with a library that's actually right at the front entrance. And then the building, sort of some final two shots of the building at night, the way that it can sort of express itself in unison or simply be random or as itself. Second project I want to share is the Samsung Human Tech Research Center. This is Samsung Electronics has been a longtime client of NBBJ for many years. And several years ago, we were approached to design this building on their Suwon campus. And the challenge with this building, well, with Samsung was, and I apologize for the darkness of the background image, but The challenge with Samsung is that they had had spectacular success over the last decade with expanding globally and really elevating the level of quality of their products. But they were still missing that innovation or that sort of entrepreneurial flair. And so they saw this building which is really a learning center for Samsung employees and a research center on how they conduct their business. They saw this as an opportunity to sort of introduce a means of promoting that innovation into their company. And so this building is actually, I mentioned to you sort of that positive polarity notion earlier. This building actually is one of the first where we've actually explored this notion of polar magnets in a tall building. And because of the tight site, it necessitated really a vertical learning campus. So there's an interesting way that you'll see shortly in how the learning block and the residential block are stacked. So we took the given program, and our first step was to really break down what the components were. And there are really three components. There's the educational, which is the classroom. There's what we call the hospitality. People travel from all over the world to be educated and to train in this building. Some stay 3 days, some stay 6 months. So there's a significant hospitality component. And then there are the other pieces, which we would call the social magnets, which are things like the cafeteria, wellness center, broadcast studio. So we took these and took the entire program and actually grouped it by scale into a chart. And then one of the greatest things was that Samsung Electronics gave us a series of what they called a day in the life charts of each trainee. And we were able to map very precisely, and these also had times on them, how each trainee would actually circulate through the building. So we took that and then combined those paths and overlaid it onto the program to start to discover major nodes in the building where that interaction and where the third place learning, the learning outside of the classroom, can actually take place. So we made a series of these wiring diagrams that were actually rather scientific paths. And then thinking about that program again, we could have stacked it in the traditional notion of usually the magnets happen at the base, and then the training would happen in the middle, and then the lodging would happen on the top. But actually take this diagram and flip it, if you will, and create a three-part building in section where it becomes vertical classroom campus, a vertical lodging campus, and then critical elements like the cafeteria, library, wellness center happen in between these two bars. And those also give us the opportunity to create dramatic spaces where people can gather in the building. And so then we took that wiring diagram and actually used it as a rigorous testing tool to examine how people really would flow through the building. And we found in some cases our schemes didn't work as well as we thought they might. And so we tested and retested and ultimately arrived at the section that we have through schematic design, which has a major library, a major wellness center, and then a major auditorium tying these two vertical bars of learning and lodging together. And then that's a final view of the building from the southwest. So this is the lodging bar, faces west, so it's more opaque to really be respectful of the solar gain, and then the glassier, more transparent learning bar to the east. And then this is a view of what the experience would be like within one of those links. So the final building I wanted to show you, and I chose to include this. This is not in Korea. This is a project we have ongoing in Shenzhen right now. This is, and I included this because programmatically it really follows in succession, and many of the ideas here are evolutionary ideas first hatched in NHN and in the Samsung Learning, and applied to a much taller structure, a structure of about 51 stories. And this project is for Tencent, and Tencent is actually the largest internet search portal and online gaming company in China. And they're actually the third largest internet company in the world, just behind Google and Microsoft. So this is their new headquarters building in Shenzhen, which is where they were originally from. So there's several sort of goals and ideas that make this project relevant. But one of the notions is the two in the middle, which is basically how do you use the vertical transportation of the building, of a tall building, to really enhance the communication, the horizontal communication among the different people and enhance the social magnets. And then how do you align the internal brand of a company, the experience that its employees feel day in and day out, with its external brand, which is telling the world that it's innovative, but is it really being innovative? So we started again with the program, and we started with the users of Tencent and with the Tencent employees themselves. And we found that basically the primary user group is around 28, and the average age of the employee is also 28. And their needs are actually quite similar to each other. And we started to build a series of, and this is a little bit difficult to see, but a series of values and goals for each one, and then tying those together in the building. And then we thought about the nature of the internet. I guess that's my 1 minute time, but I have a few more slides. We thought about the nature of the internet and the notion that oftentimes in tall buildings you take an elevator directly to your destination. But could you do something different? Could the core be designed to take you to a transfer floor where there's one of those polar magnets? And so we tracked through how this tower could be organized. It had many of the same polar magnets as our other buildings, but then we took those, the health, knowledge, and pulled those up inside of the building to create a more synergistic tower. And then this is the current section, this building we're currently in design development on. But essentially designing the vertical circulation to transfer at these major links so that it can promote communication among the different floors and among the different users in Tencent. And then there's a view of the building from the exterior. So these are some shots of what the link floor is. It's literally the gymnasium and the library suspended between the building. An interior view of the gymnasium, a view of the typical office contrasting their current with what is proposed. And then the office space itself, which is, while highly efficient, still provides areas for that vertical interaction. And a final view of the building. So I think just to sort of summarize, since I'm out of time, just the lessons as we think about Korea and the tremendous potential for globalization and this being such an educated and sophisticated society. How can the buildings that we design here reflect this global aspiration? And how can the buildings themselves, rather than being just innovated in and of themselves, how can they promote innovation? It's not expensive. You can focus on a program that's already there. Just think about realigning it and reorganizing it. Thank you.